And good evening. Good to see everybody tonight. Thank you for joining us. Those of you who are online on YouTube tonight, glad to have you with us as well. This is Faith Baptist Church, and this is our prayer meeting, our midweek prayer meeting. We're going to start with Bible study and get into Proverbs chapter 26 tonight, and we're going to learn and grow and sit at the feet of Jesus tonight and learn from him. And I'm so thankful tonight for my dad who's bringing that study. He's brought us all the way through to Proverbs 26 so far, and we're pushing toward the end of the book, and it won't be long before we'll be talking about that last study. And so I hope that you're collecting these. You can catch them online, as you know, on our YouTube channel. And speaking of which, those of you who are online, if you want to join us for prayer a little while later, we hope that you will. We would love for you to send your prayer needs in, and this is how you can do that. You'll go to the YouTube page. You'll sign in, as you're already there, but you'll sign in. And as you sign in, you get the opportunity then to comment. You'll fill your prayer needs in the comment sections. Make sure that it's clear that it's from you, if you would, please, so that we can be respectful of the needs that you are offering. And those of you who are in the house, I know that you know the drill here. If you have a prayer need that you would like to share with all of us tonight, then we're asking you to grab one of the cards from the pillars in the four corners of the room. And if you'll fill that card out, make sure it's nice and clear. Yours truly, I'm leading that prayer time after our Bible study tonight, and so these old eyes of mine are going to need a little bit of help from you, and so I would appreciate if you make sure that's very, very clear. And so we're going to take just a couple of moments and pray and ask the Lord to bless our time of study this evening, and then we're going to start. Lord, thank you so much for the privilege that we have of gathering together around your word tonight. Will you lead us, please? Will you guide us into your truth? We are so assured as we open your word that you are never trying to hide from us the truth. You're never avoiding us with the truth. Your word has made it very clear that you actually provide wisdom as much as we ask, Lord, especially in our times of trial, our various trials. And I pray, therefore, that tonight, Lord, as we seek your face with many prayer needs, no doubt, but also, Lord, just the need for guidance, I pray that you'll guide us this evening, Lord, as we study your word together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, preacher. We are, as he has pointed out in chapter 26 tonight. Last week, at the end of the session, those of you that were here or maybe would have observed it online would have noted that I gave the verses that I expected to cover, and there were 7 verses. For a variety of reasons, I've dropped 2 of those tonight, and so I'm only going to do 5. The good news is, it's possible we've done a few minutes early. The bad news is, it's not going to happen. No, I really, those 2 verses, in my view, can be handled another way, and maybe it better be handled away, because I really do want to spend some time. I want to focus down. I want to dig down on especially the first 2 verses this evening that I indicated last week we'd be talking about, and those would be verses 4 and 5. This is 4. Now we're going to read it, and we're going to be sure we understand this verse. We're going to beat that verse up before we leave it. But one thing I want to emphasize, I would talk about at the beginning is this fool, because this comes up in both verses. And I want to be careful with that because, I recognize that's not a small thing to refer to someone as a fool. In the event that somebody has recently read or familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, you'd be familiar with Matthew 5:22, where Jesus, and I'm taking this out of context, and I want you to understand that I'm not going to go to the context, but I'm perfectly aware of the fact that the last part of that verse, where he says, whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. So whatever Jesus was meaning, the point he was making, and it was part of a larger point. Certainly what I get from that is that's not a small thing to refer to somebody as a fool, and I don't expect to refer to a single person tonight as a fool. At the same time, there are such things, because that term referring to specific people appears several times in the Scripture. And there are certainly occasions when a person may act foolishly, or they may be foolish, may say something foolish, which is generally what we're going to be talking about tonight. They may say something foolish when otherwise they may not necessarily be a fool. Now, in the way of review, I define the very first night, and I come back to that, I'm comfortable with the definition that I gave, which is a fool is someone who thinks that they know. They know something, they don't know it, but they're sure that they do. And you may know people like that when they get on a particular subject, they're totally certain, they're absolutely certain they know what they're talking about, and they absolutely do not know what they're talking about. And in that situation, they would be described, according to Proverbs, as a fool. That's a foolish thing to do. There are 78 references in this book here, in Proverbs, a fool. Not a one of them is positive. So it's a negative condition that exists, and I want to be sure we get that before we invest too much of our time in these first two verses. Anyway, answer not a fool, answer not a fool, according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him. That's what it says. Now, just to be totally certain we get what this verse is saying, we're going to break it down. Do not respond to a fool. That's what it says. You cannot read this verse any other way, but that we're not supposed to respond to a fool. The reason that I think that this is specifically talking about something that a fool may say is because the verse 4 in KJV, which is, of course, underlined at the top there in blue, answer not. So in other words, this is something that comes up. We may know, for example, that a person has a foolish position, that they have a position which they have enlightened us with over a period of time, and that position may be totally wrong, but they hold to it firmly. This is not an opportunity for us. This is not an occasion for us to engage in that situation. This is answer not. In other words, in this situation, what this is talking about is when somebody says something or asks a question demonstrating foolishness. That's what this is talking about. And then it says, according to his folly. Now, I could have characterized this in the red a couple different ways, but the simplest way, I suppose, might have said, do not respond to a fool in kind. In other words, when a fool says something foolishly, leave it. Do not respond to what that person has said foolishly, the foolish thing that they've said. Leave that alone. That's what that says. Do not respond to a fool when he speaks foolishly. Specifically, when we should not respond to a fool about what the fool is speaking foolishly. That's really where this verse 4 goes. The remainder of the verse. Now, we're all familiar with times in the Scripture when the Lord gives us instructions, thou shalt not. There's some of the 10 Commandments where thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. When, for whatever reason, God doesn't choose to give us any illumination about why we shouldn't kill or why we shouldn't steal. He just says, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. Some of the 10 Commandments he does. But in any event, that's not the only example. It's just one that comes to my mind where God sometimes tells us why, sometimes he doesn't tell us why. He told us why here. He told us why here. You're going to be just like he is. I have another paraphrase, which I happen to be fond of, frankly, which says what this verse says. Do not wrestle in the mud with a pig. You both get filthy, and the pig likes it. That's what that verse says. That's what that verse says. Do not stoop to the level of somebody who has no clue. Argue with them when it's going to make no difference at all. All you have done is stoop to their level. And I cannot put too much emphasis, in my view, on the instruction on this. Do not. Some of the Proverbs are comparisons. You familiar? We've talked about a bunch of those. It's better to live in the corner of a housetop than in a White House with a brawling woman or whatever. There's times when it says this is better than that. So in other words, some kind of a comparison. There are some other Proverbs that we get that are kind of more or less observations. We have one of those this evening where it's just an observation. It's just like, this is something you can expect to see because you're going to see it. But this is different. This is a specific instruction. This is an admonition. This is a command. Do not. Don't do it. If you do, hello, you've messed up. That's what this verse says. Now let's look at verse 5. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. Verse 5 says, you answer, you respond. When a fool says something foolishly, you respond. Don't you dare be quiet. That's what it says. And again, we get the instruction, we get the explanation of the reason why, that God gives us the reason why, or he may, lest he be wise in his own conceit. He may think you agree. He may think everybody agrees. He probably has the impression that he's doing better. His foolishness is looking better all the time because every time he says it, you agree because you didn't disagree. You respond to a fool. when he speaks foolishly. The same way verse 4 begins, except for the word not. Identical. Identical. Lest he be wise in his own conceit. I have a paraphrase for this one too. Sometimes silence is golden. You know the expression, silence is golden. You may have heard it. And we have some verses in Proverbs that says, keep your mouth shut. You know, we had one of those in chapter 17. You keep your mouth shut and people think you're smarter than you are. But, you know, there's times when silence is golden. But in this case, silence is fool's gold. It's this fool's gold. This person who spoke foolishly has solidified his or her opinion because you have by your lack of response suggested to them at least that you agree. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. That's verse 5, isn't it? So, Proverbs 26, 4 and 5. How are we unequivocally? There's no equivocation here. There's no, it's better if you do this, or sometimes you should. Unequivocally instructed to respond to a fool when he's spouting foolishness. What are we supposed to do? 26:4, we should not respond. 26:5. How do we know which to do and when? I'm sorry, how do we know which to do and when? You know, there's several things, you know, I talked to the preacher about it, we talked about it several times, it would be just, it's mildly unfortunate about the format of this class, and because we can't really interact well. The people on stream, of course, thank you for being with us, really have no opportunity to raise their hand and butt in. And the people here, the people on the stream wouldn't get it if you did. So it really doesn't lend itself. But I would really like to know, I'd really like to have some feedback from you folks. Incidentally, I'm going to give you some. You knew that. I'm going to give you some feedback, but I really would like to hear your feedback. Well, how do we know which? These two verses, you could forgive a person for thinking that they're contradictory. In other words, they both can't be true, but you know something? Hello, class, they are both true. They are both true. Yes, they are. So how do we know which to do and when? Well, I have a couple ideas. Think about the following. Does the fool already know how you feel and maybe just baiting you? Now, we may have been here before. When somebody knows your position, we can talk in theology. They know your position about eternal security, for example, and they have a different view, and so they're baiting you. They're trying to draw you into an argument of some kind when everybody knows, involved in that argument, you and the person speaking foolishly, knows it's not going to change any opinions. That's when you get down in the mud with the pig and you both get filthy and the pig likes it. That's what happens there. So it's possible that the person is baiting you. That's 26:4. Do not respond. Do not respond. 26:5. It's also possible the person doesn't know. They don't know how you feel. And so they may say something. Let's stay with that same illustration. We could use a bunch of them. If we chose to, we could talk about a variety of subjects, including political subjects, when people, dig in their heels and they've got a position and they bait people to respond, and it rarely goes well. But let's stay with the illustration we had. So it's about eternal security, and this person says something which is foolish. I'm sorry, it's just foolish. They think they know. They don't know that they don't know. And frankly, until somebody helps them, they can't learn. I mean, if you don't know, you can't learn. It's a little bit like, and I use the illustration to begin with, it's hard to lead somebody to the Lord if they don't know they're lost. I mean, you just got to know you have a need in order for the need to be satisfied. You can't know that you can't be taught if you don't know you don't know. So in other words, it's possible that they don't know, and you have an opportunity. So that's 26:5. That's 26:5. Because if the person then says something foolish about the illustration being eternal security, you don't respond, they'll think your silence is golden. Your silence is gold, fool's gold. You got to answer something. Sometimes you have to answer. You got to answer. You've got to answer. Or they'll think you agree. They'll think you agree. Anyone who's ever, this happens, I know, in one-on-one conversations, and it's possible if you really thought about it, and I'm I'm pressing you to think about it. But if you really thought about it, it's probably happened to you. These situations have happened to you. But I'm going to tell you, in particular, a person teaching a class. Sometimes people say something, and it's just, I'm sorry. You can let it go, or you can kind of say, okay. But sometimes you just have to respond. You've got to say, no, I'm sorry, there's another view on that, and there's another way to see that. You've got to respond. In a business meeting sometimes, I'm sorry, you just have to respond. You cannot let it go. Okay, that's one thought. How about this one? This is a big one. This is a big one. It's one thing if it's just you and the person saying something foolish. That's one thing. But if there are other people there and you let it go, everybody there can think you agree as well. If other people are listening, and I go back to my class situation, you pretty much have to respond. Now, I'm going to digress here for a minute and a half. I think I can do it that quickly, and give a personal story that doesn't make the hillbilly look all that good. I was sitting around a table once we were all professors, and there, for whatever reason, we were waiting on a meeting to start, or waiting on a meal to be served or something. I don't remember the occasion exactly, or why we were all there, but we were all sitting there, and we were just talking randomly, and one of the professors spoke up. And let me just tell you that sometimes that there's a person in a mix that is brighter than anybody else in the mix. And this professor was brighter than anyone else in the mix. If you went home tonight and you Googled the 10 most important Supreme Court cases in history, he argued one of them. He argued one before the Supreme Court, among the 10 most important in history. Brilliant. And here's what he said. I don't remember how it came up. The issue was intelligent design. And for those of you that are not familiar with the term, intelligent design is code for creation. That's what that is. The opposite is random evolution, survival of the fittest. That's the opposite. So I don't know how he brought it up, but he said, intelligent design. He said, I don't know why anybody believe that. He said, that makes about as much sense as a flat earth. That's what he said. Now, it was quiet for a moment, and I'm just going to tell you something. I really held this guy in high esteem. I'm sorry, he's a smart guy. But I didn't respond. I'm there thinking, what should I say? First of all, I assumed everybody at the table agreed with him, as everybody at the table felt the same, including me. And to this day, I'm ashamed I didn't respond quickly, and then the moment was gone. It was just gone. I want to tell you something. If there are others listening, and somebody says something outrageously foolish, particularly something like the example I just gave you, you got to speak up. You really need to speak up. Don't let them think you agree. They'll be wise in their own conceit. There's a third thing I would suggest, and this one, would be really nice, wouldn't it? If we were walking closely enough with the Lord when we had the sense immediately to respond and respond appropriately. That's really the answer. That's really the answer. There is a right way to handle this situation when a fool speaks foolishly. When a foolish person speaks foolishly, there's a right way to respond, or there's a time not to respond. None of us want to get it wrong. We all want to get it right. The Lord knows. The Lord knows. And if there's time, or if we're open to it, and the Lord gives us an unction, a nudge, shut up, then as much as we would like to engage and show our wisdom, then we be quiet. But the converse is also true. I have to tell you something. I love those two verses because they begin the same way, but they have an altogether different conclusion, and both of them are important. They're both important. All right. Here we go. The great God that formed all things, rewardeth both the fool and rewardeth transgressors. Why did I choose this verse? Well, God predictably rewards sinners. And of course, in this context, rewards is referring to, that's the outcome. That's the compensation. That's the conclusion. God gives sinners what they have coming. That's really what that's saying. That's how rewards is being used here. God gives sinners what they have coming. We get that. That's no surprise. But you see, he's also promised to reward fools. And I'm telling you, there is no example one more time. Not only in the 78 times in Proverbs, but there's no example in the Scripture of fools being discussed or presented in a positive manner. I promise you, whatever the reward is, whatever the outcome is, whatever the compensation is, for people who think they know, who insist on not being told differently, who are determined to assert a position that is indefensible, there's a reward for those folks too. There is a reward for people. God will deal with people. I want to tell you something. The reason I think this is important, it's important, I'm persuaded, for us to be very careful. Be very, very careful when you close your mind. Now, if you can say, and if you can point to, thus saith the Lord, shut it down. Shut it down. Beyond that, be very careful, because God rewards transgressors, sinners, and He also rewards fools. And as I read that verse, I think it turns out we're hoping for rewards. Yes, we are. We're hoping for rewards. We want those rewards. And I know people sometimes say, well, now, that sounds like you're just doing this so you get something out of it. You're just serving the Lord, or you're just doing this, whatever. We really shouldn't do it for those reasons. Well, bless their hearts. I'm glad that somebody's pious like that. But the fact of the matter is, all of us hope for rewards. We hope for those. We go back to the Sermon on the Mount for a moment, and you recall or not recall the verses in chapter 6. Do not your alms before men to be seen of them, and then but don't be like the Pharisees, that hypocrites do their alms, so they can be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou when thou doest thine alms, let not thy left hand and what thy right hand doeth, and thy Father which seeth in secret Himself shall reward thee openly. We all want to give. We all want to do our alms, and frankly, there is a reward if we get it in the manner in which those alms are given, and we all want that. None of us want to do that wrong. The verses that follow, when thou prayest, don't be as the hypocrites do, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and the corners of the street, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet. When thou shut that door, pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. We want those rewards. We don't want the others. We don't want the others. There's no suggestion here that a person who transgresses loses their salvation, assuming they have it. But God deals with it. This verse here, you recall early on, I talked about four major themes in Proverbs. The fourth one we've talked about half a dozen times. Words have consequences. Deeds have consequences is the third one, and here it is. Deeds have consequences. They do, and we want the good ones. We want the good ones. All right, new verse. Where no wood is, the fire goeth out. So where there's no talebearer, the strife ceaseth. Now, we had this subject come up once before. But the reason that I chose this verse this time is a little different. This has a different, this was making a different point. Talebearer appears 4 times in Proverbs. The words of a talebearer actually appear in this chapter, the words of a talebearer. It appears, as I recall, at least one other time, talking about the words of a talebearer. In other words, it's describing a person who gossips. That's what this is about. Talebearer is a gossip. So the other instructions in Proverbs deal with the people that gossip. This is, it goes down into the inward parts of the belly. It causes pain. It deals harshly with. And of course, in the New Testament as well, we pointed some New Testament verses out when we were here before. Whispering, backbiting is listed among some pretty bad, ugly things, and these are things which every one of us should want to avoid. So this is different. This is different. Gossip is bad. A solution, well, maybe not satisfying, is nevertheless simple. When you hear it, don't repeat it. Don't repeat it. This is to the one the gossip is being told to. Now, I'm going to tell you something. You can determine from morning till night that you're not going to talk about other people. You're just not going to do that in a manner that would be considered gossip. In other words, I would put it this way. Would you say it if they're there? Would you say that if they were standing there beside you? And that's really, you could, sometimes you say things about people that are important to be said, but we wouldn't say it that way. And usually it's, of course, to somebody who can't do anything about it except repeat it. That's the best they can do. But the fact of the matter is, this is to the person to whom the gossip is told. In other words, you'd be walking along minding your own business, and somebody comes up and tells you a juicy bit of gossip, and it would be just totally satisfying to repeat it. I'm sorry, it's just nice. I mean, I got something good. Some of you remember the great cultural TV program of the '60s, Hee Haw. And there was one of the skits that they did on there, of course, these people saying, we don't repeat gossip, so listen close the first time. And, that was funny at the time. Actually, it would coincide, frankly, with your preacher's growing up years, which could explain some things about him. When you think about Hee Haw, you could, whatever. But in any event, this is talking about the person to not repeat it. This isn't talking about the person who originates the gossip. This is talking about the person who hears it. So the instruction here is, you hear it, don't repeat it. Don't repeat it. If enough people don't repeat it, it dies. Where no wood is, the fire goeth out. So there was no talebearer, strife ceaseth. Don't repeat it. Okay, it's the last verse for this evening, and we may be here a few moments, but I want us to get this. Whoso diggeth the pit shall fall therein. He that rolleth the stone, it will return upon him. Now, you may be familiar with the verse. I don't know that there's any deep theological point to be made from the verse, but it's a totally interesting verse, in my view. There is a classic example of this, and one more time, my guess is if I had an opportunity to put this up here, early on, somebody would point out what this classic example is of this one here. There's one. There can easily be more than one, but there's at least one. And I would cite the one that I refer to as in Esther 7:9. Now, it's possible that you folks are not as familiar with Esther as you might be, and so I'm going to invest just a very few minutes and give you some of the highlights. There was a king, Ahasuerus, whatever his name was, King Ahasuerus, and he was king in Persia. He controlled from India to Ethiopia. If you think about it, it's a hunk of territory. 127 provinces, and he was a big guy. And so he calls all his noblemen together, and they had a party for 180 days. 6 months they partied. I'm sorry, that's a serious party. So he partied for 6 days, and at the end of the time, he decides they're going to have a feast. I guess I'm not sure why they needed a feast after they've been partying for 6 months, but they did. At the end of the 7 days, he called for his wife Vashti to come in, and he wanted everybody to see how beautiful she was, and she wouldn't go. She wouldn't go. So he was beside himself with being upset. So he said to his wise men, what should we do? And they said, you can't let that go. If you let that go, people are going to hear about it, and wives everywhere are going to think they don't have to do what their husband says. Well, we see the problem. So said you can't let that go. So sure enough, you got to put her away. So he did. He said, Vashti, you're no longer queen. So he had over a period of time, he chose a queen, and he chose Esther. Esther was a closet Jew. That's important. Her cousin, Mordecai, he was a Jew, but he was not a closet Jew. That's important. So she's the queen. So Mordecai, one of his tasks was to be at the palace gate or whatever, and he's there one day, and he overhears two people plotting to kill the king, and they're going to kill the king. And so he narcs on them. He rats on them. He tells, and sure enough, it was investigated. They found out they were going to kill the king, hung these two guys, and that event was written down in the Chronicles, in the events that happened during that period of time. It was recorded for history, in other words, and so that was there. So in any event, the king's man, the king's consigliere, the king's hitman, the king's big guy, was named Haman, and he rode in and out of the king's gate, daily, and everybody got down on the ground and bowed and, kissed the earth, whatever they did, but Mordecai would not do that. And he got wind of that, and that, of course, upset him because he's a big guy. I'm sorry, I'm a big guy. You get down on the ground and, whatever. No, Mordecai wouldn't do that. So he goes to the king, and he says to the king, there's some people in our country that are bad people. I mean, they have their own traditions, they have their own laws, they don't do what we do, they're troublemakers, we need to put them away. And the king gave him authority to do just that. So he sends out letters to the whole kingdom and says on a particular day, everybody's going to kill Jews. And of course, Mordecai gets word of this, and he's enormously upset. And so he makes communication with Esther. They agree that she's got to go to the king and try to straighten this out. And so they agree that 3 days the Jews are going to fast before she goes in, because if she goes into the king and he doesn't reach out a scepter, she's immediately put to death. So this is kind of a big deal. And he hadn't asked to see her for 30 days. I mean, it had been a while. So she said, do this. And so sure enough, at the end of 30 days, she goes in, kind of stands off the side. The king sees her, reaches out the scepter and said, yes, Esther, whatever you want is yours if it'll be the half of my kingdom. She said, I'd like to. What I want to have a banquet with you and Haman. And then we can talk about it. So the king said, okay, let's have at it. So Haman, of course, hired a kite. He gets a chance to have a banquet with just the king and the queen. I mean, this guy is. I mean, he's strutting. He's feeling good about life. So they have the banquet. Esther puts on the banquet. The king says, what do you want? You can have it even though it be the half of my kingdom. And so, and she said, I want another one of these tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll deal with it, but I want another one of these tomorrow. So Esther, the king said, great. So Haman goes out. He's strutting high. I mean, this guy's feeling zesty. He goes out and he goes past Mordecai, and that upsets him. I mean, this guy has been with the king and queen, and tomorrow's going to be with the king and queen again. And here's this guy who has the audacity not to bow to him. So he says, he gets home and he's pouting around, and his wife and his people say, you got to hang that guy. You got to hang that guy. So he builds a gallows 50 cubits high, 50 cubits, probably 75 feet high, 7 stories. 3-4 times as high as this building, as the inside of this building. So anyway, so in that night, between the two banquets, the king can't sleep. And so he asked somebody to come read the Chronicles. Let's hear what's going on. So they read about Mordecai. And he said, whoa. This guy, saved my life. What do we do for him? I said, nothing. We didn't do anything for the guy. We're going to fix that. So in the morning, he calls Haman in. This is before the banquet. Calls him in and said, what do you think we should do for somebody who's, has special favor from the king? What should we do? And Haman said, you know what? You should put the king's robes on this guy, put him on the king's horse, have him ride out through the streets, and have someone run in front of him and say, this is the way that we treat the people. Because Haman knew who it was. It's Haman. That's who that is. Haman said, yes. Okay, this is Mordecai. You do it, buddy. So now Haman puts Mordecai on the horse, runs out and does these things. And of course, he's feeling lower in a snake's belly. Comes to the banquet. King says, what do you want, Esther, even though it be half of my kingdom? And she said, I want you to save my people. I want my people to be killed. All my people are scheduled to be slaughtered, killed. Who would do this thing? This wicked Haman. And the king was wroth. He gets up, storms out. He goes into the garden, walks around the garden a little bit. He comes back in, and when he comes in, he finds Haman. This is, do your best to picture this a little bit, but he finds Haman on the couch, or the King James says the bed, but he finds Haman there with Esther begging her to save his life. And the king says, you have the audacity to take advantage of my wife in my house, which is what he said. So this is the 9th verse of the 7th chapter. And Harbana, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who has spoken good for the king. He's reminded the king, this Mordecai, this is the same guy, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon. 50 cubits high, hang him on his own gallows. That's what that verse in Proverbs says. Whoso diggeth the pit shall fall therein, he that rolleth the stone, it will return upon him. Now there's a common term that if I use that term, I'm about to, everybody would probably recognize it. Karma? Karma? That's the term that's often used. And, I understand, well, that's not a term that I learned it at my mother's knee. I don't know when I learned it. I don't know exactly when I learned it. But frankly, I've used it. And karma, yeah, that's right. They got what they got coming. They actually, he's hung on his own gallows, hoist on his own petard. Karma. But the truth of the matter is, I look up karma. I'm sorry, I don't get out much. And I just occasionally take the time to look up something. I looked up karma, and this term comes from Hinduism and Buddhism. Yeah. See, this is to describe, you take all of the person's previous lives, reincarnation. And you take the sum of those, and if they've been pretty good in their previous lives, then their next life, they're going to have a better life. If they have not been good in their previous lives, their next life, it's not going to go well for them. That's karma. That's karma. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Very few Baptists believe in reincarnation. I'm just going to tell you, if somebody here has a disabuse, I want to disabuse you of that notion. If you think that's one of our tenets of our faith, it's not. It's not. We do not believe in that. I'll tell you what we believe in.